The federal government and the All Progressive Congress have rejected former Vice President Atiku Abubakar's proposal to restore petrol subsidies if elected president in 2027. Information Minister Mohammed Idris and APC National Chairman Nentawe Yilwatda described the proposal as a risky policy reversal that could worsen Nigeria's fiscal pressures. Atiku says Nigerians have not benefited enough from savings from subsidy removal and has proposed a targeted and transparent production subsidy to lower petrol prices and support local refining. Idris, however, warned that restoring subsidies could reverse economic gains, weaken investor confidence and reduce funding for infrastructure, healthcare, education, security and social protection. He said subsidy removal had released 15.8 trillion naira to federal, state and local governments between June 2023 and December 2025. Professor Kenneth Ife is a global financial expert. He joins me now to discuss the controversy surrounding this latest campaign move. All right, thank you very much for being here. Has Nigeria actually seen sufficient economic benefits from the removal of petrol subsidies? And what, in your thinking, would be the likely impact of restoring subsidies and government revenue, inflation and public spending?
First of all, in the scorecard, we saw the minister say that 15.8 trillion was from, we got that gain from the subsidy removal. I don't think that is 100% correct because World Bank has repeatedly claimed that 50% of that subsidy never actually got to federal government. They were trapped by NNPC. And of course, you know what happens in their inefficient operations. So we've got to get that figure right when you return what was being, what has disappeared. So the full impact of that review has not actually triggered down to the grassroots because 50% was trapped by NNPC. The second point, of course, is that you don't subsidize in broad macroeconomic terms and even in development economics, you don't subsidize consumption. What you subsidize is production. For example, I'll give you an example. You have an import-dependent economy where you are simply exporting your raw material, exporting jobs and importing poverty. And the maximum you can earn in a value chain, either it's petroleum value chain or gas value chain or food value chain, is 10% of that value chain. And you are coming back to say, go and borrow money, 100% to afford the final refined products. It doesn't make sense because you're going to be perpetually in debt, perpetually in abject poverty, and unemployment will continue to worsen. Now, the second point is this. The government has actually effectively transferred subsidy from the public sector to the private sector. Dangote subsidizes PMS by 20%. That's why our PMS is about $88.88 per liter, and Ghana is $1.3, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, $1.7. But if you want to go further down, encourage the refiners by giving them the crude that they need. Dangote needs 19 shipload, you're giving him only 3. So he's importing from outside and then paying premium on the one he gets from Nigeria, and then still subsidize the PMS by 20%. So I think we're on the wrong course with that suggestion. And thirdly, we have to go and open the reports of EFCC that looked at this criminal enterprise called fuel subsidy. We haven't opened those reports, and then they haven't taken any action on all the things that are happening in that enterprise. So, if you want to go for that's that. Then the fourth one is this. You cannot borrow money to pay for subsidy. That is unlawful. When you consider fiscal responsibility at 2007, it doesn't recognize that as a legitimate expenditure or as a legitimate borrowing. You cannot borrow money other than for capital expenditure and human resource development, and you're going to use it to pay subsidy. You can't do that. And it's unlawful to actually ask central bank to go and print money to pay for the $500 billion naira required every month by NNPC to pay for subsidy. and then ended up printing 27 trillion naira. That's unlawful. You can't lend, CBN cannot lend more than 10% of the past year's revenue, and it must be repaid within that financial year. So all of those things that have been going on have been stopped by the central bank, by the courtesy of the president, and then you can't take us back into that. You can't. It doesn't make any sense.
I get where you're going with that, but we're looking at some of the, I mean, this is campaign season. Everybody has a proposal to put to the people. Atiku described the federal government claim that petrol subsidy had been abolished as one of the biggest economic fraud. That's on the one side. He also questioned the rationale for providing fiscal incentives to petroleum investors while rejecting what he described as targeted intervention to reduce the burden of high energy costs on households. Your reaction?
Well, when you say energy, energy is very broad. Electricity is part of energy. I can understand the case of electricity because you have cross-subsidy in electricity. Tier 1, Tier 2, 209, 100. So you have the cross-subsidy going on there. But then it is you have to target any subsidy to the people who are producing and processing. You don't target it on consumption because you have no way of measuring consumption. You are creating another criminal enterprise because that's what I started with. Go and see what EFCC found out when they investigate petroleum subsidy. It's unimaginable. Ships that have been decommissioned for about 20 years, we are reported to have been bringing fuel and they're getting the. You don't want to go there.
I think maybe I didn't get the parts that I actually wanted your response on. He says poor Nigerian. He said you're removing the federal government is running a contradictory economic policy that removes support for poor Nigerians while granting tax credit concessions and other incentives to major investors in the petroleum industry. I think that's actually the area aside the household.
Let me explain to you. Fundamental, we are in a market economy. The fundamental thing about market economy is investment. You bring investment, investment creates economic activity. Economic activity creates employment. Employment creates sustainable, income, disposable income. And with disposable income, you can pay your way out of poverty, health, education, and the likes. You've got to get investment in. Whatever it takes you to incentivize investment to come in, whether foreign or domestic, you've got to go there. Because it is when that investment lands that it goes on productive capacity, and then you create a productive economy, and then you have a chance of creating employment. You're reducing poverty sustainably. So that argument doesn't have any limit, any merit. So it is, so that's why they have to encourage the investors. If you're also going to ask me what else you need to do, get rid of OPEC, because it's going to be blocking the opportunity for these investors to come in and produce the crude that is required by emerging refining capacity in the country. Look at Dangote. It's going doubling to 40 billion investment. Then you have $50 billion going in Ondo. You have Bua doing 200,000 barrels in Akwa Ibom, and more modular refineries. That's where you have to encourage, because that is where you are effectively transferring subsidy to. They are now beginning to subsidize the economy. Private sector should provide the subsidy, as Dangote is showing. It's actually de-risked all the transportation network to remove the costs and bring costs down by bringing CNG, 4,000 CNG vehicles. Push the thing, remove federal government. It is actually encouraging criminal enterprise. You shouldn't get there. In fact, federal government should even get out of what do you call this transfer, cash transfer. Push it to state governments. They are getting more money, more than 350% more. Let them do whatever they want. Federal government should exit all these areas and focus on strategic infrastructure and then defense, foreign affairs, and stop, extending our country into all kinds of frivolous areas. We don't need all those.
Professor, thank you very much for obliging us tonight.